Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going exploring the world of economic management.
But not just any economic management.
Yeah, right.
We'll be taking a look at how things are done, or at least how they were done a few years ago.
Okay.
In Thailand.
Thailand.
Yeah.
That's right. From what I understand, our source material is a Thai economics textbook.
It is. It's really interesting. It not only lays out the economic theory, but...
It actually uses data too, right?
Yes.
Like real-world data to analyze the Thai economy.
They even use run regression analysis to get a clear picture of Thailand's aggregate supply and demand curves.
Whoa, run regression. That sounds intense.
It is a pretty advanced technique.
So I guess our big question for this deep dive is, what are the guiding principles behind economic decisions?
Right. And how have those principles evolved over time, especially in a fast-growing economy like Thailand's?
Definitely. Now, before we get too deep into the weeds, let's do a quick Econ 101 refresher just to make sure we're all on the same page,
Okay, sounds good. So let's start with macroeconomics.
Macroeconomics, all right.
It's basically the big picture view of the economy. Imagine looking at an entire forest instead of just focusing on individual trees.
Okay, that makes sense.
You're looking at the whole system.
The whole system, yeah.
How it grows, how it changes.
So the textbook talks about macroeconomics using common sense assumptions.
Yeah.
Does that mean we can ditch the complicated math and models?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
Common sense in this context means starting with some basic assumptions about how people and businesses make decisions about money.
Okay.
But to really understand how all those decisions interact on a larger scale, we need more than just intuition. That's where the more complex tools come in.
Gotcha.
Like the run regression analysis this textbook uses to analyze what really drives Thailand's economy.
So it's like combining a basic understanding of human behavior with powerful data analysis to get the full picture.
Exactly.
All right, that makes sense. But economic thinking isn't static, right? I mean, things change over time.
Absolutely. Things are constantly evolving. One event that really shook things up was the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh yeah, that was a big one.
It showed just how interconnected the global financial system is and how vulnerable it can be to shocks.
Right, and how quickly things can go wrong even when the economy seems stable.
Right. The 2008 crisis really forced economists to rethink some of their assumptions, and it led to new areas of research, especially around things like financial regulation and risk management.
So before we move on, I think it's important to clear up a distinction the textbook makes between GDP and wealth. It seems like a lot of people use these terms interchangeably, but
they're not quite the same thing.
Right.
GDP, or gross domestic product, measures the total value of all the goods and services produced within a country in a specific period.
Got it.
Usually a year. It's like a snapshot of the economy's activity.
Okay, so it tells you how much a country is producing right now.
Exactly.
What about wealth then? Is that just GDP but over a longer period?
Not exactly. Wealth is the total value of all the assets a country owns.
Oh, I see.
So everything, all its assets, like its real estate, infrastructure, factories, natural resources, everything. Think of it this way. GDP is like a river constantly flowing, while wealth is like a lake accumulating over time.
Okay, I like that. The river flowing into the lake.
The river of GDP feeds into the lake of wealth, but the lake has other sources as well.
Right.
And it can fluctuate independently of the river.
So when it comes to managing an economy, especially one as interconnected as Thailand's, there are different schools of thought, right? Like different approaches or philosophies on how to do it.
Exactly. And this textbook focuses on two main schools, the classics and the Keynesians.
Okay, the classics versus the Keynesians. It sounds like a battle of the economic titans. Tell me more.
Well, imagine the classics as the hands-off group. They believe in free markets and minimal government intervention.
So the classics are all about letting the invisible hand of the market do its thing.
Exactly. They see the economy as this self-regulating machine that will naturally find equilibrium and generate prosperity if we just let it run on its own.
So what about the Keynesians? What's their take?
The Keynesians argue that the economy isn't always self-correcting, especially during downturns.
Okay.
They believe the government needs to step in and stimulate demand, especially during those slower periods.
So they're more interventionist.
Right. They might propose things like increasing government spending on infrastructure projects to create jobs and boost demand, or cutting taxes to give people more money to spend.
So to stick with the machine analogy, The classics trust the machine to run smoothly on its own, while the Keynesians think it needs a mechanic to step in and make adjustments from time to time.
Exactly. Now, to see how these philosophies play out in the real world, let's take a quick trip through some key economic periods.
Oh, history lesson. I'm ready. What era are we starting with?
Our first stop is the post-World War II boom.
Okay, the post-war era.
Yeah. This was a time of incredible economic growth, fueled by rebuilding efforts and a surge in global trade. Keynesian ideas were really influential during this period, as governments took a more active role in managing their economies.
So the post-war period was like the golden age of Keynesianism.
You could say that. But, like all golden ages, it eventually faced some challenges.
That's right. What happened?
Fast forward to the 1970s, and we hit the oil crisis and stagflation.
Stagflation, that's a scary word.
It is. It refers to a really nasty combination of high inflation and high unemployment.
Oh, that's a tough situation. High prices and not enough jobs.
Right. And this stagflation really challenged those dominant Keynesian ideas because traditional Keynesian solutions didn't seem to work.
So what happened then?
Well, it created an opening for new ideas. And that brings us to the rise of free market ideologies in the 1980s.
Okay.
With a big focus on deregulation and globalization. This period saw a lot of economic growth and innovation.
Right, but it also led to some other issues, like rising inequality.
It did. Each era had its own set of unique economic challenges, which led to shifts in thinking and policy. Now, I know this deep dive is focused on Thailand.
Yeah.
And this textbook is a really good resource for understanding that.
Yeah, the fact that it actually uses real data to model Thailand's economy.
Exactly.
Like using run regression analysis to understand the aggregate supply curve.
That's right. They use data to model how much businesses in Thailand are willing to produce at different price levels.
Okay, so this curve tells us about Thailand's overall production capacity.
Right.
And if something happens that causes this curve to shift, that's going to affect prices, right?
Exactly. And the textbook highlights how changes in production costs, like a sudden increase in oil prices, can shift that aggregate supply curve and lead to what we call cost push inflation.
So if it costs businesses more to produce things, they have to raise their prices. And those higher prices get passed on to consumers. It's a chain reaction.
Precisely. But it's important to remember that cost push inflation is different from another type of inflation called demand pull inflation.
Okay, so what causes demand pull inflation?
Imagine a really popular concert with limited tickets.
Right.
Everyone wants to go, so the demand drives up the ticket prices.
Right. Classic supply and demand.
Exactly. That's demand pull inflation, too much money chasing too few goods.
Okay, so two different types of inflation, each with its own root cause. Now, when it comes to Thailand specifically, we have to remember it's what economists call an open economy, right?
That's a crucial point. An open economy means a country is heavily involved in international trade with a lot of imports and exports.
Which definitely describes Thailand. They're a major exporter of things like electronics and rice.
Exactly.
But how do economists analyze these open economies? Are there specific tools or models they use?
There are several, but the textbook introduces one called the ISLMBP model.
ISLMBP, what does that even stand for?
It stands for Investment Savings, Liquidity Preference Money Supply, and Balance of Payments. It's a framework for understanding how things like interest rates, the overall output of the economy, and the flow of money in and out of the country all interact with each other.
Okay, that sounds pretty complicated.
It can be, but it's a really powerful tool for understanding how government policies and global events can impact an economy like Thailand's. Think of it like a map for navigating the complex world of open economies.
So a map for understanding how all these different economic factors are interconnected in an open economy. Is there any concept related to open economies that's especially important for Thailand?
One really important concept is perfect capital mobility.
Perfect capital mobility, all right.
Which essentially means that money can flow in and out of the country with very few restrictions.
Oh, I see. So it's easy for foreign investors to invest in Thailand and also easy for them to pull their money out.
Exactly. And this perfect capital mobility has significant implications for how Thailand manages its economy. We can talk more about that and those other key concepts in part 2.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to our deep dive exploring economic management in Thailand.
All right, picking up where we left off.
I think it would be helpful to unpack that ISLMBP model a bit more.
Yeah, that one sounded pretty complex.
It can be, yeah, but it's actually a really useful framework for understanding how things like government policies and global events can affect an economy like Thailand's.
Okay, so remind me, what does each part of that model represent again?
Sure. So the IS part stands for investment savings.
Investment savings.
And it shows how interest rates are connected to the overall output of the economy, like GDP. Basically, when interest rates are low, businesses are more likely to invest and expand, which then boosts the economy's output.
So low interest rates can be a good thing for economic growth. What about the LM part?
Right. LM stands for liquidity preference money supply. And it focuses on how much people want to hold on to money versus how much money is actually available.
Gotcha.
It shows how those things interact with interest rates.
Okay.
For example, when the economy is doing well and people are spending more, the demand for money goes up, which can push interest rates higher.
Okay, so it's kind of a balancing act. Now, what about the BP part of the model? What does that one tell us?
BP stands for balance of payments, which is basically a record of all the money flowing in and out of a country.
Right, through things like trade and investment.
Exactly. The BP curve shows how interest rates can affect those flows of money. For instance, if Thailand has higher interest rates than other countries, it might attract more foreign investment, which would improve its balance of payments.
So the ISLM BP model helps us see how interest rates, output, and flows of money are all interconnected in an open economy. But how does this model actually apply to Thailand specifically?
Right. Well, the textbook makes a key assumption here. It assumes that Thailand has what's called perfect capital mobility.
Perfect capital mobility. We talked about that earlier, right? It means that money can move freely in and out of Thailand.
Yes, exactly. There are very few restrictions on the flow of capital.
So it's relatively easy for foreign investors to invest in Thailand, but also easy for them to pull their money out.
Right, exactly. And this perfect capital mobility has a big impact on how Thailand manages its economy. For example, back in the early 1990s, Thailand experienced a surge in foreign investment, partly due to these open capital markets.
So lots of money was flowing into Thailand. That sounds like a good thing, right?
It can be, but, it also comes with some risks.
Okay, what kind of risks?
Well, in Thailand's case, all that foreign investment led to a rapid expansion of credit and a big boom in asset prices, particularly in real estate.
Oh, this is kind of like a bubble forming.
Yes, exactly. It created what's known as an asset bubble, where prices get inflated beyond their real value.
Okay, and what typically happens with bubbles?
Well, they eventually burst.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened in Thailand.
Oh, no.
Yeah, eventually investors started to worry about whether this boom was sustainable.
Right, whether it could last.
Exactly.
So what did they do?
They started to pull their money out of Thailand.
Oh, no.
Which caused the bubble to burst.
And what was the fallout from that?
Well, it led to a very sharp decline in asset prices, a banking crisis, and a pretty deep recession.
So this is a classic example of how perfect capital mobility, while it can fuel growth, can also create vulnerabilities.
Yes. It can make an economy really sensitive to changes in investor sentiment.
Right.
If investors get spooked, they can pull their money out very quickly.
And that can have a devastating impact on the economy.
Yeah.
So managing an open economy like Thailand's is a real balancing act.
It really is.
Now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the tools that governments use to influence the economy. Things like fiscal policy and monetary policy.
Exactly.
Can you remind us what those are and how they work?
Sure. Fiscal policy refers to changes in government spending and taxes.
Okay, like the government's budget.
Exactly. So if the Thai government wants to boost the economy, they could increase spending on things like infrastructure projects, which creates jobs and increases demand, or they could cut taxes, which gives people more money to spend or invest.
So fiscal policy is about the government using its budget to directly influence the economy.
Right. Now, monetary policy, on the other hand, focuses on controlling the money supply and interest rates.
And who's in charge of monetary policy?
That's the job of the central bank, which in Thailand's case is the Bank of Thailand. If the central bank wants to encourage borrowing and spending, they can lower interest rates, which makes it cheaper for businesses to invest and for people to take out loans.
Okay, so lower interest rates can stimulate economic activity. But what if inflation starts to become a problem?
Right. If inflation starts to get too high, the central bank might decide to raise interest rates.
And that makes borrowing more expensive.
Exactly.
Which helps to cool down the economy.
Precisely. It's all about trying to find that balance between encouraging growth,
Sure.
but also keeping inflation under control.
Right. It sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It is. And it's even more complex when you consider that Thailand is an open economy.
Right.
So policy decisions made in Thailand can have ripple effects beyond its borders. For example, if Thailand lowers interest rates to stimulate its economy, it might attract less foreign investment.
Right, because investors might be looking for higher returns elsewhere.
Exactly.
Which could then impact Thailand's balance of payments.
Right. Policymakers have to think about the domestic and the global implications of their actions.
It's like playing a multidimensional chess game. You have to think several moves ahead and anticipate the consequences.
Exactly.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground so far.
We have.
From basic economic principles to the ins and outs of open economy.
Yeah, and now we're ready to look ahead.
Exactly. What does the future hold for Thailand's economy?
Well, this textbook highlights 4 major trends that are likely to shape Thailand's economic landscape in the coming years.
Right.
Okay, so let's get into it. What's the first trend on the horizon?
The first one is the increasing financial integration with Asia.
Okay, so Thailand's becoming more interconnected with its neighbors.
Exactly, especially in terms of trade and investment.
So that creates a lot of potential for growth.
Yes.
But it also means that Thailand's economy is increasingly tied to the fortunes of the region.
Exactly, there's more interdependence.
Right, it's a double-edged sword.
It is. A rising tide lifts all boats. But if one boat starts to sink,
it can drag down the others. So how can Thailand navigate this increased interconnectedness?
Well, one way is through diversification.
Diversification, okay.
Expanding its trade and investment relationships beyond just its immediate neighbors.
So spreading the risk, not putting all its eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Okay, what's the second trend we need to be aware of?
The second trend is the globalization of capital.
Yeah.
We've already talked about how money can flow across borders more easily than ever.
Right, and how that can create both opportunities and vulnerabilities.
Exactly. It can be great for attracting foreign investment.
Right.
But it also makes economies susceptible to those sudden shifts.
Yeah, we saw what happened during the Asian financial crisis.
Exactly. So how do you manage these volatile capital flows?
Right. How do you prevent another crisis?
It's a tough question. Some economists suggest measures to regulate those flows more directly,
Okay.
while others really emphasize having strong economic fundamentals.
So things like keeping inflation low and the currency stable.
Right, to try to attract more long-term investment.
Okay, so finding that sweet spot between being open to investment, but also protecting yourself from those sudden outflows.
Exactly.
All right, what's a third trend we need to think about?
The third one is the aging of Thailand's population.
Ah, yes. This is something a lot of developed countries are dealing with.
It is. As more people retire,
Right.
it puts more pressure on healthcare and pension systems.
Yeah, and it also means a smaller pool of workers.
Right, which can slow down economic growth.
So what are some potential solutions here?
Well, some countries try to encourage immigration to boost the workforce,
Right.
but that can be politically sensitive.
Yeah, definitely.
Another option is investing more in automation and technology to increase productivity even with a shrinking workforce.
Okay, so working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And of course, there's also the need to reform Social Security and healthcare systems to make sure they can handle these demographic changes.
Right, so thinking about the long-term sustainability of these systems.
Exactly.
All right, we've got one more trend to go.
Right. The fourth trend is the shift towards a greener economy.
Oh, yeah, this is a global issue.
It is.
It's driven by concerns about climate change
Yeah.
and the need for more sustainable development.
Exactly. How do you balance economic growth with environmental protection?
Right, that's the big question.
It is, and Thailand's no exception.
So how's Thailand approaching this challenge?
Well, they recognize the need to move away from relying so heavily on fossil fuels
Okay.
and towards more renewable energy sources.
Like solar and wind power.
Exactly.
And also promoting energy efficiency.
Right.
It sounds like Thailand has a lot to consider as it plans for the future.
It does, but the good news is
Yeah.
Thailand has a history of being pretty adaptable and resilient.
That's true. They've weathered a lot of economic storms in the past.
They have. By understanding these trends and embracing innovation and collaboration, Thailand has a lot of potential for success.
That's a great point. It's about seeing these challenges as opportunities for growth and transformation. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into economic management.
Yeah,
We've explored some fundamental principles,
we have.
looked at the challenges of open economies,
Uh-huh.
and peered into the future of Thailand's economic landscape.
It's been a great discussion.
It has. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and that you'll continue to explore the fascinating world of economics.
Thanks for joining us.